No one likes uncomfortable conversations, but sometimes it is the uncomfortable conversations that we need to have. And specifically when it comes to apartheid, whenever you mention apartheid, there's almost immediately this kind of shutdown. On the one side, you have people that are sick and tired of apartheid being blamed for every single mistake that the ANC has made over the course of its 30 years in power. And on the other side, you have people that absolutely hold that apartheid is to blame for every single mistake that has happened, and that we need large form redress in order to fix the problem. Personally, right, I would just like to point this out to anyone that might think, oh, yeah, the white people just want apartheid back. I think if you actually did the research and you actually did the polling, you would find that very few white people want apartheid back. In fact, I think if you look at anyone my age and younger, there is no shot that you would be able to fill a stadium of people that thinks apartheid should make a comeback. And that's because most of us, my age, for example, I'm 40 years old. I didn't grow up with apartheid. I have no idea what apartheid was. So if someone were to come to me and say, "Oh, remember the good old days," I'd be like, "What do you mean? I don't remember anything." My first president, the one that I remember as my president, was Nelson Mandela. Right, the first big moment that I remember from my childhood was South Africa lifting the World Cup in 1995, and Nelson Mandela standing next to Francois Pienaar. That's what I remember, right? So I have no. When you say good old days, I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about, right? I wasn't there. I don't remember it. So I wouldn't want apartheid back. I like a lot of what the new South Africa has to offer. And I think, and I've said this before on the channel, if you're going to have just the economy as your main driver, you would want to have as many people as possible partaking in the economy, because that's what ultimately leads to greater success. More people is just always more better. That said, though, I think we have to talk about what the real evil of apartheid was, because I do think apartheid was an evil system. I think there may have been some who originally had a reasonable idea of what they thought apartheid would be. So if you go back and you listen to the academic realities of apartheid and why they were supporting apartheid, the idea was genuine separateness, right? So the idea that we are different cultures, and as different cultures, it's impossible to really form a country, which is to some extent true. Countries tend to be large groups of people that roughly share the same cultural ideas. So they have the same idea around work ethic. They have the same idea around family units, family planning, the same sort of moral values around stealing and murder and crime, and what is or isn't a crime, what does good governance look like versus what does bad governance look like. And when you have this group of people all sort of pulling in the right direction, that is a country, and that is what a country is based on. So the original idea, the academic sort of concept of apartheid may have been that we have to have every single group go about and do their own thing. There is no denying, however, that the then National Party definitely used the separateness to exclude the vast majority of the population from partaking in the economy. Not only that, they did use apartheid to exclude them from having access to resources that would have made their lives better. And this is where I think, so just off the bat, I think apartheid as a general system was a very evil system. That being said, though, I don't think the exclusion of black people was its biggest evil. And the reason I say this is it's not unique. Throughout history, we have had many instances of populations excluding entire populations from economic growth. You go back all the way to the Sumerian Empire, they would take people as slaves. Those slaves were completely excluded from the economy. And this was just the basic, ordinary function of society for more than 6,000 years of our existence. So that's not really the evil. Yes, that's bad and that's evil in our modern era, but that's not unique to South Africa. In my opinion, the thing that truly made apartheid evil, the thing that I think really destroyed this country and the future of this country is twofold. I think the first is the complete and utter destruction of the black family unit. Thanks to how apartheid was set up, you had black fathers who had to live close to the cities in order that they could work because most jobs were found inside the cities. This meant that children of black families were growing up without their fathers, oftentimes without their mothers, to actually raise them, to teach them what values look like. And the truth is, we know, thanks to empirical studies, that the one of the biggest markers of success for a young person is that they grew up in a home with both a mother and a father. So the unit is intact. And then the second one is education. So if you can grow up in a family unit where both mother and father is in the home, and you can have a good and decent education, that is the biggest marker of success. And I feel that is the biggest flaw and mistake of apartheid. Now, the question is, how do we then fix this? Now, like I said, in the current era, in the current climate of South Africa, you have groups like the EFF and the ANC that says the only way to fix this is through mass redress of the original sin, so to speak, here in South Africa. The problem with that is even if you were to redress the economy, as I explained in my previous video, and you can go watch that, it is literally the video that I uploaded just before this one, even if you were to redress the entire economy and remove the 2.7 million white working aged people from this economy, you would only lower unemployment from 26 million to 23 million. That's it, right? 23 million black South Africans will still be unemployed. So clearly, redress isn't the problem. And more importantly, redress does not speak to the original great sins. It does not reunite the black family, nor does it bring any sort of meaningful education to the system. The issue, of course, is that if the ANC already started in 1994 to focus on what was important in South Africa. So I want you to imagine for a second the following. Nelson Mandela comes to power and he decides, let's run the economy. Let's do it correctly. And he says, right, South Africa is finally open for business. All countries throughout the world can stop with your sanctions. You can open your businesses and your factories and everything here. We're going to open our markets to you. Then, taking all of that money from all of the corporations and the businesses that open up and pay corporate taxes, you spent that money on where it belongs: education. Building good schools, paying teachers well, trying to attract teachers from all over the world. So rather than spending money on corruption or spending money on nonsense initiatives, you took the vast majority of our money. And South Africa is in a brilliant position to do this. We don't have a lot of natural enemies where we are. So we don't need to spend that much money on our military. We don't need to spend that much money on social programs. Instead, we say we're going to take all of that money and we're going to attract teachers from all around the world and say, hey, come teach in South Africa. We will pay you a great wage. We'll build schools. We'll go to the business and say, hey, guys, we want you to do business here in South Africa, and we're not going to stop you. We're not going to tell you to sell 30% of your company or anything like that. What we're going to ask you is that you invest some of your money in local schools, in education facilities, in universities. And that investment can be used to give children access to free education that will allow them to ultimately become a part of the economy and become contributing members of the economy. That would certainly have led to, now 30 years later, South Africa being in a much, much better position. The issue is the ANC didn't do that. The ANC merely took that economy and then started gutting it, then started pushing for more inclusion of the black population into the economy without actually growing the economy. And I think in many ways we can look at the failure of Eskom to see the ANC's inability to think about the global reality of South Africa or the national reality of South Africa. You see, socialism, and I read quite a few studies on this. This paper actually highlights it perfectly from Hodgson and Jeffrey from Econ Store. They highlight so brilliantly why socialist thinking doesn't work on a nation scale. So this is sort of for anyone that says, hey, but apartheid worked for the white people back then. Why can't it work now for the black population? Well, as it turns out, socialism works really well on small scale. So when you have very few people that really partake in an economy, and these people mostly follow the exact same culture, socialism is not too bad. The problem is the second a population gets too large, socialism starts to break down because you have various different needs within that society, various different skill sets, various different beliefs. And so ultimately, the trust that is required for a socialist system to work really goes by the wayside. So just there. But if we look at Eskom as the main catalyst for how the ANC misjudged everything, in 1998, Eskom wins the award for the best run power utility in the world. But something else happened in 1998. The leaders and the owners of Eskom went to the government, went to Thabo Mbeki and said to him, we will run out of electricity. The power utility was never built to provide electricity to the whole of South Africa. We need more power stations. Mbeki decides to ignore this. Why? Because it would be a massive financial investment. And so Mbeki says, no, we'll just continue doing what we're doing because we don't want to waste that much money because we want to spend that money on other things. And instead, we'll just keep connecting more and more South Africans to this now power utility. In 2008, we finally reaped the rewards of that warning in 1998. Where finally the amount of electricity that Eskom is generating is now no longer capable of supplying the whole of South Africa with electricity. And the ANC followed the same sort of mindset with the economy. Instead of thinking, how can we grow the economy, an economy that was never built to really facilitate the 60-odd million people in South Africa, instead of recognizing that, hey, this economy that was once built to really only service about 3 million people will now have to service 60 million people. So we have to grow it in order to facilitate 60 million people. They said, no, we'll just connect more people to this economy. We'll just force this economy to hire more of the black unemployed people in this country, and that will be fine. In spite of the several warnings that were given to the ANC, in spite of the fact that every time they would introduce a new set of racial legislations, the economy would do worse and worse. The ANC just doubled down and tripled down on their mistakes. And ultimately, they realized that there is only one way out of this, and that is to shift the blame to apartheid. The issue is that, yes, even if you want to make the argument that apartheid is to blame, nothing you do now is going to fix that, because you have not fixed the family unit and you have not fixed the education system. Instead, what you did, again, same that they did with Eskom, was rather than fix education, they just lowered the pass rate, saying, well, if we just get more people to get an education and get matric, that should solve the problem. But of course, it doesn't help that you have matric, but your matric certificate isn't worth anything. If you want to have a good education system, it needs to be a good certificate. And right now, the South African matric certificate is on par with most countries' grade 9. So clearly, the education system failed. This is the reality that we live in South Africa. Unless we can bring back Christian conservative values, and unless we can bring back the Christian family unit, the idea of mother and father in the house raising their children, and this is going to be slow. It's not going to be something that's going to happen overnight. You're not just one day going to wake up and say, oh, look, I'm rich now. And for this, I'll actually use my own family as the example. Both my grandma and my grandpa had to leave school at the age of 12 and 13, respectively. Why? Because they simply did not have enough money to finish school. My grandfather worked from the age of 13 all the way to the day that he retired as a bricklayer at various intervals, because at the age of, I think, 25, 26, he had finally saved up enough money being a bricklayer to buy a small little farm in the Northwest. And he turned that into a tobacco farm and ultimately was able to buy 2 more farms with the profits from that small little tobacco farm. Then at the age of 45, I think, or something to that effect, there was a drought, and the drought forced him to go back to being a bricklayer. But my grandfather made one solemn pledge. He was never a rich man, but he made one solemn pledge. He will use any and all means available to him to make sure that his children go to university. He never had the option, but his children may. And every single one of his children did go to university. My dad, I remember a time where my dad was very poor, and we lived in very, very poor conditions. But my dad became a medical doctor, and in time he was able to work himself into a reasonable position where he was able to send every single one of his kids to university. And today, his kids are better off than what he was. He was better off than what his grandfather was. And my kids will hopefully, if I have some, will be better off than what I was. That's the reality. Wealth is created generationally. It's not created in a single foul swoop. It's very rare that you get someone coming from abject poverty and then suddenly make them rich. We have to commit to that now. And the sad part is that the ANC has taken this long to actually start doing it, which means it's going to take another 40 years for us to finally get to a place where South Africa is functioning. But at least it won't be hell always. If we start now, within the next 10 years, we most likely will have half as many people unemployed. People will finally have opportunities. Jobs will finally be created. But we have to get back to the foundational basics. Fix the family unit. Fix the education system. And allow for a culture of excellence rather than a culture of resentment politics where one group of people look to another group of people and just want what they have. Don't want to work their way into being in a similar position. They just want what that group has. And I get it, right? You look at this group and you might feel a lot of hatred. You might feel a sense of this is unfair. And maybe it is unfair. But the question is, how do you fix what is unfair? You can't take what they have because what they have isn't enough to feed everyone. What they have isn't enough to give everyone jobs. So you have to fix the problem by simply allowing for people to fix their own problems. That's the reality of South Africa. And of course, it is in no way, shape, or form helped by the fact that the ANC uses their positions of power to enrich themselves. Mashatile, Deputy President's kids, scored 91 million rand in Gauteng tender because the ANC is simply in this to enrich themselves. Here you have the ANC themselves telling councillors to stop looting and instead learn from DA-run municipalities. The Department of Defense spent 110 million rand on St. George's Hotel lease in 2 years. This government continuously steals the money that should belong to the people of this country. We cannot fix this country with the ANC in power. It is not possible. We need leaders that are Christian conservative, that hold to Christian values, and that will put the people of this country first by allowing the family unit to once again become important in South Africa, by allowing education to become the forefront conversation within this country. If you like what I do and you think more people should have access to the content that I make, please consider hitting that like button, hitting that subscribe button, and leaving a comment telling me how you think we should fix this country. Then I want to give a massive shout out and a thank you to all of the patrons as well as the YouTube channel members for continuing to support this channel. If you want to become a patron, hit the link in the description down below or just the join button right below this video. As always, be good to each other, be kind to each other, and I will see all of you in the next one. Peace.